I think we can get started now finally. All right? Just a few minutes late. That's okay though. All right. Hello. Welcome everyone. Oh my goodness. 360 iDev. Are y'all excited? I'm really excited. Woo! Yay! All right. So my name is Jenny Blumberg, and I'm here to talk to you about enterprise mobile apps. So if that doesn't sound right, then stay anyway because it's going to be fun. Enterprise is fun. All right. So a quick introduction. I'm a mobile product manager for a small software company here in Denver called Citrian, and we build mobile apps for businesses. Formerly, we were in the business of enterprise social products, and then before that, we did RSS. So I've been with these guys for getting close to 9 years, so that's just ancient. But at one point in time, they took a team of us and rolled us out to build Glassboard. So anybody remember Glassboard? All right, cool, a few people. It's been a little while. So I just bring that up because I wanted to point out that I've had a bit of experience with the joys of building a consumer application and then watching it fail, and then pivoting back over to building apps for businesses because that's where people tend to want to give you lots of money, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're all here, to talk about that. All right, so to kick things off, let's first make sure we understand what we mean when we say an enterprise mobile app. So quite simply put, an enterprise mobile app is an application that a person uses to perform functions of their job. So right off the bat, anybody here could think of tons of apps that you use to do your job like Dropbox or Evernote or Slack or any number of things. But the differentiator that I want to point out is that a true enterprise app is one that comes with IT's blessing. So the goal of this discussion is to understand how one can take an application and then make it enterprise ready, right? So IT will bless it. Sorry, I had to make some kind of reference. This feels like I'm doing a sermon up here on this podium. All right, so we know the what of an enterprise mobile app. So why enterprise mobile? Why do we care? So I picked out a couple metrics that really stand out to me that show how wonderful the enterprise app market is. So for starters, enterprise mobile is a very, very rapidly growing industry. So in a survey among all different kinds of companies, so all different industries, what we found is somewhere around 91% of companies want to do some kind of mobile initiative. And of that 91%, 86% plan to spend over $100,000. So oftentimes you talk to companies and they say, we want to be on mobile. They don't even know what they want. They're just like, I want to do mobile. Because they see people bring their phones to work and want to do things on their phone. So the gears start turning and they say, okay, how can we take some of the business processes that we do on a daily basis and get them on people's phones so they can be super productive, right? So secondly, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but iOS dominates the enterprise. So if you look at metrics around device activations just in general worldwide, it depends where you look, but iOS and Android are neck and neck depending on if a new device was introduced or what quarter it is. But if you look at just the enterprise, iOS is winning over Android and especially Windows Phone. So last year, iOS represented 66% of all device activations for business use. And there's a couple reasons for this. For one, Apple obviously is very popular with consumers, and those same consumers also have jobs that want to use their device at their job. So that's one reason. Another reason is Apple has done an excellent job at positioning themselves in the enterprise market. So the iPad Pro is starting to appear to a lot of people to be the one and only machine that you should need to perform your job. It's a laptop replacement, right? And it's also starting to climb up on the Microsoft Surface, which at one point was sort of like the end-all be-all for the phablet generation. And then finally, Apple has been doing some key partnerships over the years. You might remember it was announced that they partnered with IBM, and people are like, why would they do that? Well, it's because they're interested in getting into those business channels by way of working with IBM and Cisco, some of the big ones, to create really rich mobile app experience that are specifically so people can do their jobs. And then finally, the last metric is the demand for enterprise mobile app development is way exceeding what internal IT organizations are able to deliver right now. So Gartner did a study, and they found that the rate by which the demand is growing is 5 times faster than any developer resources that are available right now. So there's this huge gap where companies are like, gimme enterprise apps, and we don't have enough developers to fulfill that need. Or we don't have enough developers that are enterprise ready to fulfill that need. So we have this huge gap right now. And so what this has done in the industry is it's given rise to a thing called Rapid Mobile App Development, or RMAD. What did you say?
Web apps.
Don't go there. We won't talk about that. So rapid mobile app development. So RMADs are software systems that give non-developers and developers alike the ability to create mobile app experiences, native experiences. They're actual apps. They're not web apps. Those are fake. They make native app experiences without writing any code, which to me sounds quite scary. But in the industry now, where we don't have enough developers, we need a way to turn out mobile apps quickly. So you may have heard of the names like Coney or Xamarin. Has anybody had the opportunity to try one of these out? All right, fun, huh? Cool. So the focus of this discussion is definitely geared towards native development, because this is the language that we understand. I just want to acknowledge that RMADs do have a place in the realm of enterprise mobility, because for certain use cases, businesses do need to churn out apps quickly. In huge multinational corporations where they've got hundreds of thousands of employees, they'll go through thousands of apps a year. And sometimes they have really, really specific use cases, and maybe they're only used for a couple weeks at a time. In those situations, having an RMAD that you can just get a really specific use case, you're just doing one call to Salesforce or SAP or something, and that's it. It's a really encapsulated use case. Sure, an RMAD's fine. But if you want to build a richer experience and you want to have something a little longer term that employees will use, then absolutely we'll go native. And it's funny you bring up web apps, because at some point in time, a couple years ago, there was this sort of argument about like, no, native is dumb. It's going to be overtaken by HTML5 and all this. And people tend to kind of want to be on a side and be like, no, this is the line and I'm not crossing it. So there are still situations where perhaps a web app would be the right solution. Just depends on the needs of the business. But we're keeping it to native for right now. All right. So understanding those options out there. So we have different options for development. But then we also have options for providing connectivity. We have options around device management, around app management, around all different kinds of things to support our enterprise app and get it enterprise ready. So what you begin to see is that to truly understand enterprise mobile, we're not just going to focus our discussion on the app itself. We have to also understand all these different factors that make an app enterprise ready. So it's an entire ecosystem, and we're going to touch on a few of the biggest, most important things. All right. So with a lot of these features of the enterprise mobile landscape, like tunneling, app management, connectivity, all that, what you'll find is that a lot of these features are very standard in MDM vendors. So MDM means mobile device management. And a little side note, this is pretty much interchangeable with EMM. So you have your MDM vendors. So think of MobileIron, Citrix, BlackBerry, AirWatch. Those are the big players in that space. But device management is kind of a strange beast. It gives IT full control over your device. It's wonderful and they love it. But it's not so great for the user in a lot of ways. So sort of a little marketing ploy is the MDM vendors are starting to call themselves EMM vendors, enterprise mobile management vendors. And that sounds a lot better, like it's supportive of the ecosystem of enterprise mobile, and it's not device management. But the terms are pretty much interchangeable. And MDM, I think, just comes out easier. So that's probably what I'll use. So if you're working for or with a company of any significant size, it's very likely that they are using an MDM vendor to handle device and app management, and then to handle things like app connectivity and internal resources. So this will be part of the discussion as well. There's options outside of MDMs, and we'll go through those. But then there's also ways that MDMs are good, and you can make use of their product for those features for enterprise mobile. So for these small to mid-sized companies, they may not necessarily want to make an investment in MDM. MDM is very expensive, and so a lot of companies don't really want to do that if they have less than 100 employees. And so what we'll talk through is a couple options that you can build into your enterprise app that would make it enterprise ready to go. All right, so the alternative to that, to building in your own sort of homegrown solution, is doing an integration with an MDM. So when we say we work with an MDM, it most likely means you're taking that MDM vendor's SDK and you're integrating it into your enterprise mobile app. And in that way, you can take advantage of the features of the MDM. So we'll go over that as well. All right, so regardless if we're doing an integration or if we're just doing a homegrown solution, there are still very critical tenets to enterprise mobile app development that we really need to be concerned with. So we're finally going to get to the nuts and bolts. That was just like the big introduction to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of enterprise mobile app development. So now's the fun, exciting stuff. All right. So let's divide up all the enterprise mobile app topics into what we'll call the pillars of enterprise mobile, and that would be audience, data, and security. So we'll start with audience because to me it's kind of the simplest one as far as integration. All right. When we think of the individuals that are going to use our enterprise mobile app, it can really influence decisions down the line about how we're going to manage security and how we're going to manage permissions. So some qualities you might consider are things like, are you building an app for salespeople and they're always on the go? Are you building it for people where they're walking around and they're not necessarily checking a mobile device very frequently? Are you building it for somebody who has very unreliable internet access? So Citrian, we have a customer that is in the mining industry. So I think that is just about the worst situation for internet access I can think of, is being a mile underneath the earth. So in considering that, we had to build some pretty solid offline capabilities into the app. And we also had to consider how we would run that through QA in really unreliable networks, which is surprisingly hard if you want to take your phone and say, I want to be on a terrible network. So it's kind of hard to find when you need it, right? It's always there when you don't, obviously. So is the person always on a mobile or every so often? One of our customers is in a hospital, and it's nursing staff. And they use our app for corporate communications. So we had to consider, do we want the app to be just noisy enough with push notifications that the app is useful to them without being bothersome because they have far better things to do than read blog posts from their CEO. So decisions around how you're building your app, how simple it needs to be, how communicative, are all things that can be included as part of understanding the audience, and much like a consumer app as well, right? But you have to consider what they need to do their job. Are they tech savvy, or are they more of a novice? Are they familiar with iOS? Sometimes there's a person that's an Android user and they go to their work and they get handed an iPad and they have to use that to track their timesheets. Keep in mind that people aren't necessarily an iOS user. They may just be given one. So that happens a lot of times with customers. People on a sales team or a group of nurses or people on the floor of a manufacturing plant. They'll just be given a device and they may not necessarily be familiar with it at all. So in a lot of ways, focusing on simplicity is a good call. And then finally, probably one of the most important considerations, is it their own device or is it corporate owned? So right there we've got BYOD, which is bring your own device. And that pops up a lot in enterprise mobility. BYOD is so hot right now. Everybody wants BYOD, right? I want to use my own dang phone to do my job. And then COPE is corporate owned, personally enabled. So they're given a device. They have some autonomy on it, but if they're done with their job, they gotta give it back. So maybe don't keep personal stuff on it, right? So this last factor especially can have a big impact on security because it's going to influence our decisions on whether or not we want to do like a device management versus an app management system. So with these considerations, we can start to consider what is going to come later when we start talking about security. But for our purposes, understanding the audience has been covered. So as part of audience as well, let's talk about app delivery, which is fun. So we have an internal app, right? So we've either gone the B2B route where we've made an app for an external entity, but they're keeping it within the company, or we're doing a B2E app, so we've made business to employee app where it's just going to be used within our own company. And so this probably doesn't belong on the public app store, right? So it's a bit of a gray area though, right? I've noticed. I've poured over the Apple recommendations as far as what does not belong in the public app store, but you still see companies doing their company apps in the app store just because it's easy and everybody knows how to do it, right? Well, luckily, Apple has streamlined this process really beautifully. If you take Apple and you compare it to Android and Windows Phone enterprise distribution, they're very much ahead of the game with all that, because what they've done is if you're making an app for fellow employees and you're just distributing it internally, then you would just use the Apple Enterprise Developer Program, right? You just sign the app for enterprise distribution, and then you can just give it out to people, right? Super easy, streamlined. And then for external entities, of course, what Apple would have you do is to look into using the volume purchase program. So who has had the opportunity to try out VPP? Who's used VPP? Yeah? It's okay. It didn't used to be so good. It took a few years to kind of get it going. It wasn't available in all countries. But as it is right now, it is a very good way to give an app to an external entity and to sell it to an external entity. All right. Now, every so often, for distribution at least, probably the simplest way is to just poke it up on a server somewhere and employees can just download it with a link. Although, there is a way by going through an MDM vendor where they can streamline the process by way of VPP. So a lot of the MDM vendors, in addition to all the other tools that they offer, they'll do things that'll be an internal enterprise app store. So companies will have their MDM vendor and they'll have an internal enterprise app store, and it'll actually be a separate app on the phone. That'll be the AirWatch app store. And employees can just go there and download whatever company apps that they need. And the cool part is that MDM vendors can sync up with the VPP account, so it just pulls down the app and you're able to distribute it very nicely. So although there's all these steps to the process to get it internally distributed, I can almost see why some folks just go with the public app store, because there's all this extra work, right? But still, Apple has done a good job at it. In fact, Apple even recommends using an MDM vendor for distribution. So if you go through and you read the documentation for enterprise distribution signing, at the end of it, they'll even say, okay, easiest way to do this, just put it up on an MDM. That's the best way. All right. So for our purposes of the mobile development side and focusing on audience, as long as we have a good understanding of how they're using their mobile device and perhaps how we should allow them to access what resources, and then we discussed also app distribution, we just about covered audience for enterprise app development. All right, let's move on to the super fun stuff like data. All right. If you have an enterprise mobile app, you're most assuredly going to have to deal with enterprise data, right? It kind of stands to reason. So in the case of systems like SAP, Oracle, SharePoint, etc., the nature of these systems really flies in the face of enterprise mobility, because they're stored on premise, they're behind the firewall, they're locked down, and oftentimes they're not formatted in a way that's easily consumed by a mobile client because they were probably implemented 20 years ago. So the good news is that companies are starting to embrace cloud technologies like Salesforce and things like that. And so these systems interface much better with mobile because the mobile and cloud, they come together very beautifully. But the bad news is that you're very likely to have to deal with some kind of legacy back-end system. And so this brings with it all kinds of wonderful complexities, but the most difficult of which to work through is the tunneling capability. How do we get from the mobile client to this back-end data securely and easily and make it easiest for the end user? So let's talk a bit about access, shall we? So unfortunately for IT teams, mobile devices have a tendency to roam around and be outside of our nice, secure, enclosed internal corporate network. And so this can cause lots of problems for them. Well, so what people were stuck with back in the day was you either had to enforce people being on the corporate network in order to access internal data, which just completely defeats the purpose of being on mobile in the first place. Or what you would have to do is use a VPN client, so a VPN app on the phone that you would establish a connection at the device level, and in that way you could access internal data. But as we probably all know, VPN can be a serious drain on the battery, and it also doesn't really encapsulate the data. You're just going all in. So what MDMs did is they came out with their own tunneling technology, and so this is built into part of the product that they offer. So they provide secure mobile access through the firewall as part of using the MDM, but the caveat here is that by way of using the MDM, the device has to be enrolled with the MDM. So what does that mean? What does that mean to be enrolled with the MDM? So the end user experience would be this. So say my company is using AirWatch. So I take my phone and I download the AirWatch agent. It's just an app that establishes a connection to my company's AirWatch instance. And so I sign into that, and then the AirWatch agent installs a profile file on my phone. And it's a very creepy profile because it lets you know exactly what IT is going to do to you. So IT can look at your data and see what apps you have installed on your phone. And also, if you're unlucky enough to leave it on the train or at a bar, then they can wipe it. They can just wipe your device. So kind of going back to how you can see where device management wasn't such a great flavor of managing security from the user perspective, because if you lose your phone and you had some of your own personal things on it, then it gets wiped. Not a cool experience. All right, so going through an MDM, certainly the simplest way, right? But say we're not using an MDM, because we might not be. So of course there's a couple options. So there's a thing called per app VPN, and this is built into iOS. So it's just a thing that you would build into your enterprise app, and then you would just use it with a VPN resource on the other end. Simple enough. This is also a product that's part of what Citrix offers. So Citrix is a very big player in the MDM market. And then there's this community called the App Config community. And what it is a bunch of MDM vendors got together, and they're like, all right, we understand not everybody wants to make the investment in MDM. So let's start looking at what OS level properties we can take advantage of to do things like tunneling and app management and the like just using what's already in the software. And so this is sort of like a community ecosystem that you can look into as far as building in enterprise app qualities into an app without having to do an MDM integration. It's stuff that iOS has in it. So definitely something worth looking into. And of course, if we're talking about anything cloud-based and tunneling-based, we can't leave out Microsoft Azure. So they have a few Azure products that are very streamlined and very nice for establishing secure connections for enterprise mobile apps. So the service bus relay is a very common utility. It just acts as a gatekeeper between mobile clients and internal resources. The Azure AD application proxy service, this one is fairly new. It just came out this year, and so it's not really widely available. But what this does is it has the addition of some app and device management qualities. It also has user controls, and it also has a really nice built-in multi-factor authentication story into it, which we all know is good. And then finally, Azure API management is just a way of surfacing those endpoints to mobile clients so they can access them securely. But in all honesty, in my personal experience, a customer usually just has an MDM. So in my personal experience, they usually just have an MDM and they use it for tunneling. But I do want to keep going back to the fact that oftentimes a company is finding that their employees do not like the overtly controlling device management factors. And so that's why I kind of want to touch on, yes, MDM, that's all good, but yes, there's these other technologies that you should definitely be aware of. Because I did a talk on enterprise mobile last year, and last year it was all in on MDMs, don't even try to do anything else. But what we're seeing right now lately is sort of this pendulum swing where the user experience is beginning to like oversee the security considerations. And so companies are starting to figure out that they need to come up with some alternates that aren't so overreaching as like, hey, we're gonna wipe your device if you lose it. So stuff to keep in mind. All right, so in addition to the need to access those internal resources, quite often, companies will ask for some kind of single sign-on scenario. And it's funny how people go about asking for it. Because I'll be on the phone with a customer and they'll just be like, do you support SSO? Do you support it? And we're like, well, sure, maybe. Well, what do you want? What do you want access to, right? So a lot of times it's one of those things where people get excited about it because it's a cool buzzword about providing like nice streamlined connectivity, but you have to get them to define what it is exactly what they want. So basically, once access has been granted to a user in one enterprise mobile app, the idea is that they should then be able to access other enterprise resources, right? Well, that concept works really well if you're on a desktop computer and you're in a browser and you're using SAML and that's handling all the authentication and authorization and it's all hunky-dory. That doesn't exactly really transfer over to mobile. That doesn't really work exactly. So SSO capabilities, much like a lot of what we've talked about, are leveraged by MDM services. And I just threw up that you can also use a VPN. This is another way to fulfill it because I want you to know all the options. But VPN, cumbersome, whatnot, but it's a way to support it. The aforementioned Microsoft Azure products, in that they not only provide secure connectivity and tunneling, they also provide a good way to do SSO by putting cloud-based identity management in there. So what you want to find is a system like Microsoft Azure that supports OAuth. So think of it this way: in the in the consumer mobile app world, you think of like Twitter and Google and Facebook as providing a mechanism for single sign-on because they support OAuth or OpenID. So in the enterprise world, we look to Azure, we look to Google Apps, and we look at Amazon Web Services as these mechanisms that can provide a token to identify our user and then allow them to have access to other enterprise resources. And you have the added bonus of it's very nice and convenient for your end users. All right, on to our third and final pillar, which is security. So why do we care about security? Well, that's kind of dumb. Why do we care about balancing our user needs as far as keeping their data private, keeping things seamless for them, with also the needs of IT and their demands on us for security? And a little side note, I was giving this presentation to a friend, and he said that lock is not going to secure shit. So probably a bad example right there. All right. So we have our data behind the firewall, and we have our users, and they have their phones, and they want to access that data freely and autonomously, right? And IT hates that idea. So it's a balancing act, right? So the way things are typically decided upon and then executed on for enterprise mobile is step one. We decide, oh, you can't see the last one. I don't know how to fix that. I'll just tell you what the last one is. It's a secret for right now. We define a security policy. So recall we were talking about what type of users we have. Do they own the device? Is it corporate owned? Are we going all in on device management? Are we just doing app management? That kind of thing. So keeping in mind our end users. That's going to help us define our security policy. How do we grant them access? What are we using? And one point I want to clarify here is, if you come across a company that takes enterprise mobile very seriously, they will have a security policy that is dedicated only to mobile. So companies have a tendency to kind of have a one-size-fits-all security policy that they would apply to mobile devices, laptops, desktops, and the like. And they kind of feel like they can just transfer whatever rules they had over to mobile, and that doesn't always work. So a company that takes enterprise mobile seriously will have their own mobility story specific for the security level that is required of mobile devices. So then our second step is define how we're going to support the security story. So are we going to do an MDM integration? Are we going to handpick our own solutions and come up with something homegrown? And then finally, the last step, which we don't even really need is to educate your end users on what your security policy is going to be. So that's just closing the loop on security, right? That's a best practice to make sure the end users understand. But that's its own thing, way outside. That could be its own session. And we don't care. That's not our problem. So considering how we can best shape our security policy and then act upon it, let's go back to what we discussed earlier about whether people are bringing their own device or if they're using a corporate-owned device. So We can categorize the security considerations that we have in mind by looking at device level security versus app level security, and then you can even get as granular as content level security, but that's typically handled not on the client side, so we don't have to worry about content level permissions. So before we dive into MDMs, I want to quickly mention there's a very simple device management system that almost anybody can take advantage of, and that would be Exchange ActiveSync. So I just wanted to throw that out there as just a quick way of going about device management if you're looking for a simple solution. And that way you don't have to do the full investment in MDM. So for device management, what does that mean for you as the app developer? What do you have to do to support an MDM? Well, so at the very least, then if you have to support, say, AirWatch, which happens, a customer will say, hey, I'm not buying your product unless you support AirWatch, okay? What does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have to do an integration with their SDK, or at the very least, perform some app wrapping. A lot of them have an app wrapper. And so in my personal experience, I would always go the SDK route. The app wrapping technology usually works pretty well on Android apps, but on iOS, you're really giving up control of the app. And if something goes wrong, the customer tends to blame the app developer and not the AirWatch MDM wrapper. So just do the SDK.
Swizzling everywhere.
Sorry?
They end up swizzling a lot of methods and causing a lot of translation problems.
Thank you. Yes. So he just pointed out exactly why it doesn't work. A lot of translation problems and whatnot. I don't know under the covers what it does. I just know a lot of times it just don't work.
I had a nice conversation with Citrix about their encryption policies and loading videos from this.
I don't want to talk about Citrix. I have PTSD from Citrix. So what's the process by which you arrive at the SDK and SDK integration? Well, it's pretty straightforward. So you go to their website and you sign up as a technology partner, and you are granted access. It's free. You're granted access to their resources, their SDK, and they'll even help you get set up with a web interface for enrolling devices and app distribution and all the tunneling stuff too. So Mobile Iron, they'll host the tunnel for you for testing, and then AirWatch, they'll give you the MAG, the mobile access gateway, and you just install it in your DMZ, and voila, it's all good. So it's a pretty simple process to get going, but it definitely takes a bit of work. I'm being told I have 10 minutes. All right, so if we're going to be less intrusive, then we're going to look at doing app management. So it's obviously another thing that you can do by way of an MDM, but it's of course important to understand what customers are necessarily looking for when they say app management. What do they want? What kind of features does app management entail? And on the iOS side, usually what that means is things like allowing them to disable open-in, or disabling emailing and calling out of the app, or things like how you're containerizing or encrypting the data. So an example that I can think of that we've done is we've done an integration with Good Dynamics strictly for app management properties. And so what it does is our app would typically just store things in SQLite. Well, for Good Dynamics, they require that you use their own proprietary content locker, because they want that level of security. I don't know if it's more secure or what. And then they offer other things where if the app is on a phone that does not have the Good Dynamics email client, it won't allow the user to email out unless they have the Good Dynamics email client. If they just have the regular iOS one, no way. And then also there's all kinds of fun stuff like setting up passcodes and complexity around that, locking the app down so that they have another gateway that they have to go through, well, for the user side. But it's another layer of security, which people love. All right, we saved the best for last, and that is authentication. So when we consider what type of authentication works best, when we want to again keep in mind usability versus security, for mobile, when you consider username and password, it's not always good for the end user, because if we want a very secure solution where the password has to be a certain length, it has to be a certain complexity, and it expires every so often, having to type those things into a phone isn't necessarily something we want to force upon our users. Especially, we had one customer where the password expired every 24 hours. And so every 24 hours, launch the app, wait, oh, no. Yeah, so needless to say, nobody used the app ever. So you can start to consider other authentication methods, like the cool stuff like drawing a pattern, or the biometric stuff like fingerprint and all that. But in reality, what you most commonly see is companies using cert-based authentication in conjunction with having a forced pass lock on the phone, which is pretty much almost a given on iOS, right? So the combination of having the certificate on the phone and then doing the pass lock, gives us a nice multi-factor authentication scenario. So a company uses a certificate authority. Well, guess who also can serve as a certificate authority? An MDM vendor. So as a simple solution, a company will use an MDM vendor to act as the certificate authority, and then they'll also provide the mechanism by which you can enforce a pass lock on a person's phone. So while we've discussed plenty of options that all offer secure solutions and tunneling and all that, oftentimes a company will go with an MDM just because it's the simplest way to go. But I do want you to keep in mind that pendulum swing we're on. And I would definitely look into things like iOS level capabilities for app management, and also the app config community. Very helpful utilities to help you get an app enterprise ready. So to bring us back around, there's our 3 pillars of enterprise mobility. For our audience, if we're doing a B2B or a B2E app, it's certainly a lot different than a consumer app in many ways, because we can't count on the end user necessarily owning the phone. It might not even be theirs. It could be shared. And then also, one part of audience that we have to consider is, how are we getting the app to them? We're very likely not going in the public app store. We need to look at either doing Apple Enterprise distribution, or we're perhaps going to go through VPP. If you have an enterprise app, you're almost definitely going to have to work with enterprise data, some back-end system. If you're lucky, you'll be working with a cloud-based system that has all those mobile-ready endpoints, and you're hunky-dory. But the reality, again, is that you're probably going to have to deal with some legacy systems and have to understand how to connect to them. And then finally, the security considerations are not important only to keep IT happy, but also to kind of shield your users from all the work that goes into making a really secure solution. So knowing all these factors should help us get to a place where we can make an app enterprise ready. And if I have any time left, I do want to open it up for questions. Yes?
Is it a barrier to MDM usage if you have users all over the field that are also bringing their own device and don't have the ability to bring their device in to get it registered, distributed?
So the question is it a barrier to MDM adoption if you have a highly distributed workforce and they're not necessarily connected into the corporate network?
Yeah, they bring their own devices and they're distributed.
They bring their own devices. So what I have seen situations where people use sort of a hybrid way of doing device and app management. So we have one customer that's a bank, and for their long-term employees that work in the office, they use AirWatch. And so the people they are required to enroll their device into the AirWatch system. And then for contractors, temporary employees, people that are simply not in the office all the time, they go through Good Dynamics. And Good Dynamics is sort of this outlier in the MDM vendor world where they offer just an app management solution. So in that regard, there is no device enrollment on the Good Dynamics side. The person is just given an access key, so a one-time password that they enter into the app. They're granted access, and for the time being, they're able to access company resources, but their device isn't enrolled at all. But they're only able to use that one app that has that in it.
What about like workspaces and containers?
Sorry?
What about workspace and containers for those that
I understand containers in the context of like a Good Dynamics app.
offers the workspace now?
Sorry?
AirWatch is offering workspace.
That's right, they are. I don't know a ton about it. Can you share?
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed, in theory, it's supposed to be an option for just having like a container for.
Here, I'll give it recorded because it's good stuff.
So in theory, workspace space is basically a way that you can just encapsulate a certain number of apps. It's sort of like a folder on your phone. And so you don't have like your entire device managed, but you just have one set. And that's a lot of what we would bring around.
What with like selecting
Excellent. That is also an excellent
Pretty
point.
much, yeah.
So he pointed out selective wipe, which I neglected to mention. Selective wipe is a component of containerization and some of these non-MDM solutions where you can wipe just data from certain apps and not all the photos of your kids too. Yes?
Unfortunately, the biggest problem that I keep on running into is this authentication issues, mostly with legacy SOAP-based systems that rely on SAML.
Yes.
The lovely term that should die. How do you approach a business in presenting them the idea or the concept of something like OAuth? Or it's been a hard argument. The thing that I keep on running into, the buzz term, is OpenID that they keep on bringing up. The realistic term is you should be doing OAuth, and the wishful thinking term that they keep doing is we have card keys for everything, and they want to use physical card keys with mobile devices. How do you typically approach that with your clients?
So the question had to do with dealing with customers that are using these legacy systems that are horrifically hard to deal with as far as authenticating into them because they're using things like SAML, right? I don't have a good way to make the business leaders change their mind. I will say though, in my experience, a lot of companies know they want mobile. They don't really know how to do it. So if you come in there confident as heck, and you're just like, this is how you have to do it. Lay out the groundwork for how they should manage it. In all honesty, sometimes people really don't know what they want, and you just have to tell them. And so getting them on board with something like OAuth or OpenID can be a little easier if you bring the confidence that you know what you're doing when it comes to enterprise mobile. Because if they're using a legacy system and they're not doing something like putting an MBaSS over it, so like a managed endpoint system to like help give you mobile endpoints. If they just expect you to like, I guess, write the API or something like.
That's our sale, is the proxy between.
That's what you do, the proxy.
Well, that's what we try to do. We try to sell them on a proxy between saying this is a requirement.
Right. And I mean, going back to the MDMs, so the MDMs, they do a really nice thing in that you can set them up to just use pass-through authentication. You just pass credentials as a mobile client, and then it's not your problem anymore. So that's actually one thing I would definitely advocate for using an MDM, because it takes the weight off of you for having to handle the authentication. So I'm being told 0 minutes. We don't have any more time? Okay, well come find me and we can talk more, because I love talking about this stuff. So everybody, thank you.